friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark.
And I'm Midge Munster. So Penny, I recently made my own Ouija board.
I do know this.
And obviously you and I have talked about Ouija boards before. If you have not listened to episode 2, listeners, go back and check that out because Penny
Go
gives us
way back.
way back. Penny gives us a great history of all things Ouija boards in that episode. But as I was preparing to make my own Ouija board, I was doing a little more research and I found this really weird, interesting tidbit linked to my home state. And since you have given us all kinds of great, weird Wisconsin stuff, I thought it was about time I gave you some macabre Missouri.
Ooh, intriguing.
So I will start with a question. Have you ever heard of Patience Worth?
Oh, I don't believe so.
Oh, I can't wait to tell you all about her.
Oh, I want to learn.
So, Patience was allegedly a spirit who produced several novels, poetry, and prose starting in 1913.
Hmm.
But before we can get to know Patience, we need to get to know a little lady named Pearl Curran. And Pearl, born Pearl Lenore Pollard, was kind of just a very average young woman. She was an average student and she dropped out of her high school her first year due to what she later claimed was a nervous breakdown
Oh, no.
due to strenuous academic circumstances, which, like, we get it, Pearl, relatable.
Yeah, indeed.
Um, and then her family moved to St. Louis when she was 14. So my neck of, well, not my neck of the woods, but
Yeah,
very
basically.
very close.
The general
Um,
vicinity.
yeah. And when she got to St. Louis, she tried to re-enter the school system and got basically held back in a lower grade due to her lack of education, and that got her really discouraged, so she left school again. She never really received a full education. She did, however, have kind of a gift for music, so she spent the better part of her like early years in her teens and early 20s teaching music lessons around the Midwest. Um, then this all, I promise, this is all important information, so hold on here. So then at 24, she married John Howard Curran, and they he was not wealthy, like they lived a really comfortable life, but all of this information is to basically preface that neither of them were particularly well read or traveled. They didn't have like access to hanging out with a lot of like, well studied people.
Yeah.
They were just very middle class St. Louis citizens. So then, in the beginning of July in 1912, Pearl and her mother and a friend, Emily Grant Hutchings, were messing around with a Ouija board it said it was a friend's, but then I think maybe it was her mother's. I don't quite understand because, anyway. um,
It was
during
someone's Ouija board.
It was someone's Ouija board. And this was a time, as we have discussed before, where this was not a big deal. A lot of people did this. It was like a fun little game people would just mess with. But this particular day, they had apparently made contact with one of Emily, the friend's relatives. And so Emily went out and got her own Ouija board and then was taking it back and forth to Pearl's to kind of continue the communications with her relative that she had made contact with. Um, Through these sessions, though, almost a year later, in June of 1913, a communication came through from Pat C, was the name it spelled, and Pearl continued to try to connect with this entity. Then on July 8th, 1913, she claims the board seemed to be possessed with an unusual strength,
Mm.
and communications began with a woman named Patience Worth. So it was said that on this day, the board spelled out, "Many moons ago I lived, again I come, Patience Worth is my name." And then through Pearl, Patience claimed to be this unmarried English woman who had emigrated to Nantucket Island in the late 1600s and was killed in an Indian raid. And she told Pearl that for 3 centuries she had been searching for a vessel to help bring her literary ambition to light, and that Pearl was the person that she had been looking for. Um, so this is interesting.
Yes. I
um,
mean, that's a bold spirit.
yes, and of course, you know, we've set up that Pearl has had possibly one nervous breakdown at this point in her life. So there was a lot of skepticism about she is a, you know, kind of known to be a particularly nervous person. So there was, you know, questions about, well, is this mental illness? Is this, you know, just a kind of what do you call it, like a publicity stunt type
Mhm.
thing? But this is where this gets very interesting. So from here, Pearl, who we've established has little to no education, starts dictating through Patience these historical novels, poems, prose, and everything that is being written is being published and embraced by like mainstream scholars as these incredible, authentic examples of early American literature. Um, and it's coming like nothing to her. She
Mhm.
wrote nearly 4 million words between 1913 and 1937. And she would be some evenings like working on a novel, a poem, and a play simultaneously, alternating dictation from one to another without like missing a beat at all. um, and the figure, the ghost writer, as it were, uh, Patience Worth ends up becoming commended as this like incredible writer by like organizations like the Joint Committee of Literary Arts in New York, like esteemed groups are like, this is one of the greatest writers of this time. Um, and weirdly, because we're also kind of at the height of the spiritualism movement in America,
Mhm.
readers and critics alike are kind of like, well, I guess this is written by a woman who's been dead for 2.5 centuries. Like everyone just kind of got
Everyone's like,
together and was
seems
like,
about right.
seems legit, yeah. uh, what I mean, I guess we can't speak to it because we weren't alive at this point. But like, I think if what would you think if someone comes and starts publishing articles saying they're written by a ghost? What's your immediate reaction?
Oh man. I mean, I would be like, that seems unlikely.
Right, same. So I'm reading about this and I'm like, okay, what's the catch? But that's why like it was important that we set up this background that she has like
Mhm.
very little education, because no one can account for the like literary genius that's coming from the Ouija board supposedly. And sure, right, she could be pulling this hoax in private, like have somebody play in the scenes in the background who's helping her write or whatever. The wild thing is she would do this publicly.
Mhm.
So Pearl traveled the country giving performances starring Patience, and like night after night she would sit with her little Ouija board and her husband John would record Patience words in like shorthand, and people who witnessed these performances who were like big wigs, like scholars, politicians, big like successful writers, all of them were like, we just saw a miracle. And years later, Otto Heller, who was like the dean of the graduate school at Wash U in St. Louis, he like recalling it would say like, I still confess, like I completely am baffled by that experience. I have no idea what happened.
So when she's like for these like later ones, is this all coming through the Ouija? Is the suggestion that it's all coming through the Ouija board, or is she like, I made contact with this lady through the Ouija board and now she like possesses me?
So the Ouija board is always present.
Mm-hmm.
Um and there the I think the idea is that she makes initial contact.
Mm-hmm.
Um but there's also accounts where Pearl, Pearl patience, Pearl. Pearl would say that she would get this like strong sensation, like a pressure in her head, and that like visions would start coming through to her of like patients speaking, and then she would see the scenes of the books and things like lay out in front of her, and that the planchette would be like scribbling, like running amok on its own in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I do find this interesting. I don't remember if it was you. Who was I talking about this with? That the planchette. Actually, this is probably, I know exactly where this is from. This is from Miranda's zine. Again, we've been talking a lot about Miranda's
Hey.
Halloween zine the last couple days. Definitely check it out. But that the planchette originally was like a writing utensil,
Mm-hmm.
and then it had like a little pen in it, and it would
Yeah.
like scribble, right? So I do find that idea interesting, that like the planchette's kind of going as if Patience is like writing furiously. I think that's kind of fun and cute. But the so we're going to get a little bit into kind of the experience here of
All right.
what it would look like. So um the first thing I have, the noted example of the performances specifically where she was like out doing this. Someone recorded the events that took place and stated that Pearl was able to dictate a 5,000 word story that made perfect like structural sense in just under 3 hours without any pauses or mistakes. So like just rattling it off.
Mm-hmm.
Um Pearl also apparently was able to like do tasks simultaneously. So people said she would be like writing a letter while simultaneously dictating a story or poem directly from quote Patience. Um, so that's it's like there was this kind of split going on.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing that had scholars like particularly dumbfounded by her is that the poetry had literary formats and language that were specific to 17th century literature. And they, there were all these skeptics and people trying to debunk Patience and prove that Pearl was a fraud. But having examined Patience's work, there was this like deep knowledge of plants and customs and clothing and food and things from a specific time and place in England that like a housewife from St. Louis would have really no way of knowing, and that Pearl was able to draw on this like vast knowledge without hesitation. Like if someone asked her about something, she would be able to pull it immediately. So it's not like she was, going home and studying. Mm-hmm. So after like a ton of analyzation, the works of both them together, I guess, were found to be like highly accurate in historical detail and written in such a way that only like someone with a very intimate knowledge of that time period could have created them. So this was also funny. There were several accounts of Patience getting like frustrated
Mm-hmm.
with Pearl, because Pearl was like not a nice way to put it, but like people in a lot of the articles basically kept saying she was like a simple person, like she wasn't very bright. And so Patience would be like, dictating, and Pearl would like not know the meaning of a word or not know how to spell the word, and Patience like would get exasperated and like not mean with her, but like frustrated with her.
Yeah.
And there was an account where Pearl, they were talking about a yellow hammer, and Pearl didn't know what a yellowhammer was, and Patience got like really frustrated with her. She's like, everybody knows what a yellowhammer is if you're like from this area. And they looked it up in like an encyclopedia, Pearl and her husband, and it was like this very specific bird to this specific region of England where Patience was supposedly from originally. um I don't know, just very weird, interesting
Yeah.
things like that. So and even though this kind of, in a lot of ways seems like the best con in history, the Currans never charged like admission or anything to see Pearl do this with
Mm-hmm.
patients. And it wasn't like a seance show, like what you and I talked about in the seance episode, where, they're in like a dimly lit room with candles and they're like calling on the spirit. It wasn't like dramatized like that. Pearl
Yeah.
would just be sitting in like broad daylight in a well lit room with like a notepad or a typewriter in front of her, and would just be like, I love this picture. People, they said she would often just be like eating or like having tea or a cigarette and just like talking with
Just
patients
chilling.
and dictating the words. So yeah, and that's where, kind of coming back to when you asked about the board, it wasn't supposed to necessarily be like a seance, I
Yeah.
guess is what I'm saying. Like, she was not, sitting there with her hands on the planchette and it like running all over the place. But the board was meant to be the initial point of communication for them.
Yeah. I was just like, it would take an extremely long time to get a whole story through like a planchette
Right.
moving around. I'm like, girl, that would take hours.
Right. Yeah, no, so apparently she was having these like visions, and she could see the whole story, and she said she would like sometimes see two characters that would be speaking to each other in a different language, and then Patience would like kind of come in over the top and be like translating the conversation into dialogue and all these things. It's very, I do find it very interesting. It reminds me very much of like that little boy that was like claimed to be like a reincarnated World War II pilot,
Oh, yeah.
or World War One, I don't remember. But um you do, I mean, well, you don't, I do. I do wonder if like these two women had some kind of like connection through history, like, and that maybe that's why she was waiting for this particular person to do this. I don't know. I think I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. I think weirder things have happened. But anywho's it. If this isn't already, this would make for a great episode of Unsolved Mysteries.
It would. This
And
does sound very, very unsolved mysteries. I can picture the reenactment right now.
yeah, that's why I thought maybe you might have heard. I mean, between your love of Ouija boards and your love of Unsolved Mysteries, I was like, if she's heard of this, it's probably an Unsolved Mysteries episode, because it's very much giving like, did Jesus build this staircase?
Right. Yeah. Now that you're talking about it, I feel like I have like heard of like, oh, there was a ghost that wrote novels, but like I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know like the details of the
Yeah.
story.
And apparently it was almost made into a movie a few years ago. I would love to
Ooh.
see this as a period piece, like a film or like a BBC mini series or something. I would
Yeah.
love. Somebody give us Ghostwriter. I'm ready.
Oh
um,
man.
but yeah,
Classic.
no one ever really like came to a real understanding or explanation of what was happening between Pearl and Patience. If it was a hoax, if it was, you know, I mean, Pearl never. I do find it interesting how, like, because this is kind of that time frame, right, where just kind of depending on how the information was presented, this woman could have very well have ended up in like a mental asylum.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
if if she had not gained all this accreditation and been like a celebrity, she very well could, her story could have been very different. But uh, basically, to wrap up the end of how this kind of came, after like years and years, I think it was like 20 years that she did this, which is a long freaking
That
time.
is a long
Also,
time.
like, if this was a hoax, which I don't even know how you would hoax this unless she was secretly a genius and had been hiding it since she was like 12, which doesn't really make sense to me either. Um, but after like 20 years, their connection kind of started to break away, and a lot of people believe it was because Pearl got pregnant for the first time when she was 39,
Dang.
which, like,
In the olden
I was
days.
gonna say in 1913, you're dead at 39. Like, that's crazy. Um, she also lost her mother and her husband around, around these, like, not right next to when she was pregnant, but like within a
Yeah.
few years span, all this stuff kind of happened. And so, people kind of believe that she just stepped away from that during that time. But uh, it still, they wrote over 5,000 pieces of work together, and were, like I said, highly acclaimed, and they hold like this very important space in American literature, even though it's kind of like forgotten now.
Yeah.
If you read any of these, there's lots and lots of articles about this. It's very fascinating. um like, people who, dedicate their lives to studying this era of literature, like, this is really crazy good stuff. um and I think it's so very cool. And of course, also a time where we weren't getting a lot of like recognition for female writers either. Like, women were still publishing or trying to publish under male names to get any kind of acclaim.
Right.
um
I appreciate that it's both women, like that
yeah,
it's also
a
a
woman
lady ghost
ghost.
author.
Exactly. Yeah. So very cool. I am very excited. I happened upon this accidentally, and I'm really excited about it. I texted Andrew and Devin because I was like, "Do you guys know about this?" Because they're from St. Louis.
Yeah.
If you guys don't know Your Best Halloween Ever, they are not far from me here, and they didn't know anything about it either. And I was like, "Man, we need to find out if there's any kind of like historical sites or anything dedicated to her in
Yeah, it
St. Louis, because I
seems
would
like
really
there would
like
be.
to, yeah, I'd like to visit and find out everything I can, because I think she's just an interesting lady, even if she's kooky."
Yeah, it's really interesting to me. Obviously, as everyone knows, I am not really a ghost person.
You?
But me, shocking. But it does. I feel like a lot of people, like as someone who is a writer and like consumes a lot of writing stuff. A lot of people do really like kind of conceive of their creativity in this very separate sort of way.
Mm-hmm.
Like you hear people talk a lot about the idea that like a character just like showed up in your brain one day, or that you like are seeing the scene happen and that it comes to you, or people talk about their muse a lot. And I
Mm-hmm.
just kind of think that it's interesting from that perspective, like even that maybe you're
Like, if this was the only way she could tap into that part of herself.
yeah, or even if like I mean maybe she was not doing any kind of fraud, but she was like, "Oh yeah, these ideas come to my head and I don't think of myself as a creative person, so it must
Mm-hmm.
be Patience who's doing it."
Yeah. Well, I mean, even if she was like off her rocker, like, so was Edgar Allan Poe.
Oh yeah.
Like, some of the most like creative and like well uh acclaimed writers were pretty mentally ill. So,
Yeah, there's
you
there's
know,
definitely there's definitely like a triangle of like creativity, magic, and being kind of kooky. So,
and
and
yeah,
you might go towards any of those points more in your
yeah,
your life.
in your journey. Yeah. So yeah, she regardless of whether or not this is true, she's a very interesting person, and I think it's a very cool, spooky thing. I definitely want to check out some of her books and poetry now
Yeah,
after
that mean
this.
I mean maybe like I should read I want to read a book that was maybe written by a
Maybe
ghost.
written by a ghost. Yeah. So if you wanna if you wanna check out some work maybe written by a ghost, Google Patience Worth and let us know. What do you think? Do you think that she was communing with spirits beyond the grave? Or that she was just a lady with a spicy little brain? But this was a bit of a short one, but that is what I have for you today. If y'all are enjoying listening to Ghouls Night In, we would so appreciate it if you would consider leaving us a rating or a review wherever you listen to this podcast. We are currently fresh out of hot reviews to
Wah,
read
wah,
here.
wah.
So leave us a tasty one. Commune with a ghost. Leave us one from beyond the grave.
Yes, yes. If you listen with any ghosts, let them possess you and leave a review on Apple iTunes.
We would love it. And if you would like to get more content from us here, you can follow us over on the Instagram page at Ghouls Night In Pod. And if you're looking for me, you can find me across all platforms at Midge Munster.
And you can find me at Penny Snark.
And until next time,
Goodbye.
goodbye.